Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending where we are in the time zone. My name is Sofie Vasquez. I am a 23-year-old photographer from the Bronx, New York, where I'm currently am right now. And my presentation, what I'm going to be talking about today is my story in documenting independent wrestling, but also more about doing a long-term project while gaining access and trust, and sort of like it's very specific to wrestling, because it's kind of where I learned so much about not treating all of your photography, specifically as a photographer or even a filmmaker, just not to be so detached from your subjects, and having that inside access and sort of like trust really builds a very unique perspective and story. So I have a presentation, which I'm going to share. Let me just get it here. If is everyone still muted? All right, thumbs up. Okay, thumbs up. Cool. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, awesome. So I start from the bottom. Oopsie. Well, this is at the bottom, but if you want to stay connected. Okay. All right. So connecting to unlikely subjects, a docu-photo talk about access and trust. So the way I would like to kind of start how why wrestling, and one of my favorite anecdotes to kind of explain it. This is a wrestler named Dean Ambrose. If you are familiar with WWE or not, he was a very big star in like 2014. And I was a 15, 16-year-old girl, grew up watching wrestling with my grandfather. When you're a teenager, you're full of angst and you're kind of like looking for an outlet, whether that's music, whether it could be sports, and wrestling kind of just spoke to me. Even though I wasn't an athletic kid, I just loved the storytelling. I just loved his character of sort of like this lone wolf who has to like overcome betrayal and all those storylines and such. And the reason why I'm starting here is he's really the reason why I became a wrestling fan. And then as I got older and I kind of figured out my passion for photography, there was an opportunity. Well, there was a chance to meet him and maybe photograph him, but it wasn't guaranteed. And so when I was navigating wrestling for the first time, my friend was like, "Hey, he's wrestling in Indianapolis for like one night only. You have a shot if you show up." Meanwhile, I don't know how to drive. I've never left home by myself. I am Ecuadorian, so I come from very strict Latin parents. I was 21 at the time. And he was like, "Yeah, like you just have to drive 18 hours in like a cramped car. It's not even guaranteed that like you might even see, like you could see him, but it's not even guaranteed that you'll meet him or you photograph him." And then I like you guys to see how he looks like, because then the next image are my photographs of him from after the grueling 18 hours of being in a packed car and not really showing how to navigate meeting sort of like a big star. I was able to meet him and photograph him a couple of times, and actually got to speak with him. And the reason why I kind of like to share this story of like why wrestling, how much it means to me, and sort of like the full circle aspect is really just kind of because I think I got here because sort of what really was navigating was just passion. It wasn't a paid gig. It wasn't guaranteed. It could have been a hit or miss. You drive 18 hours and, it could have been an opportunity or not, but really it takes a certain type of passion to really motivate you to just kind of do maybe the unthinkable, maybe the most wild. And I really like to just start out there to kind of just show how I've always been involved in my works, because a little bit of how I got into wrestling is, just move this here, is sort of like I wanted to photograph wrestling from a perspective that had never really been seen. In the mainstream, wrestling is seen as it's fake, it's scripted, well, they're getting hurt, but they're not really getting hurt type thing. And the more I got to know these wrestlers on a personal basis, where I know that this wrestler right here is Edith Surreal, formerly known as Still Life and Apricot of Pears, but I also know her real name is Edie. That this is Big Game Leroy. He plays with a Nintendo Switch. but his real name's Sean and he's from Bed-Stuy. Because of these interpersonal relationships that I've developed with them, I also get a more deeper and rich understanding of the specific subculture that I'm documenting, because I know that there's like an equal balance and an equal understanding of, I'm coming into this space, a sacred space for them, with a kind of like a consensual intent of about I'm very curious about your space, but I also love your space. And if you would allow me, I would love to have my talent be involved in documenting and capturing these moments. So what I'm showing here, kind of just like snippets and my photographs. This is all through 1 year, July 2020 to August 2021, where I was traveling from, this was in New York, this was in Texas. And I really just wanted to show at first, like, I started getting the ringside access. That's how everyone starts, you know, because there's something in wrestling that's very particular and very interesting. I think it's very unique only to this sport, where it's called kayfabe. And kayfabe is, because wrestling is storylines and it's storytelling, they want to keep their characters and their gimmicks alive, even though like we have documentaries and, you know, wrestling was invented, or the way we know wrestling was invented many years ago, where the secrets have been known. It's still part of the culture and it's still part of how they want to survive in the business. And it takes a certain trust for someone like me to be like, hey, can I just be backstage and essentially break kayfabe, where I'm photographing these close moments with wrestlers, or these sort of like candids, or kind of like, I didn't want to create images that were just the standard promotional pictures. I know I really wanted to make my work as human as possible and as relatable as possible. And yeah, these are characters, these are people who've been on TV, these are people who have been on TV shows and films, but at the end of the day, I know them as Erica, Kevin, Beef, Crusher, MV, like everyone here I know from a first name basis, and just know a little bit about their story, which for me, I love so much, because you get to create these images, or you get these insights that are very unique. And I think what's one of the important things, like when you're photographing, this is very particular to subcultures, but I think it can be equated to like any project that you're doing, is I feel like photography, especially documentary photography, and it has a very way of like, you know, you treat them as subjects. And I've also been trying to learn not to call them like my subjects as much, because it has a very detached feeling to it, especially when you're going into like a long-term narrative project. You know, you can have that line of like, you don't have to be friends with everyone. You can still have like that sort of uh approach, like, and whether it's photography, filmmaking, where you don't want to be so biased, but then also, in order to get that access, in order to get those stories, you kind of have to let your guard down a little bit, and you kind of have to level up, just as sort of like person to person. Because when you put a camera in front of someone, they're going to pose, especially in an entertainment industry. And with wrestling, it took a lot of time to get to this place as well. It wasn't really an overnight success thing. One of these photos I want to show, this is actually, if any of you watch wrestling, he got signed, so he's on TV now. But when I met him January 2021, Daniel Garcia, this was the first time I had met him, never had heard of him before. We just struck up a very brief conversation, and I just said, oh, can I take your portrait? He had just finished his match. I took a few candids, and this was the portrait that I had. But, you know, it's not really, it doesn't do much for me. It could, you know, it could be a cool place about a tired wrestler, one who's like worn out from after wrestling for like a couple of hours. But after that moment, after first meeting him, I just kept in contact, whether it was just social media or whether it was other shows. I'm like, oh, Daniel Hart, like, it was just sort of a natural acquaintanceship and friendship that kind of built. The last time I had photographed him before he had gotten signed, this is April 2021. And these just photos are very night and day, because here he doesn't see me as this other person with a camera. He knows me as Sofie. Oh, this is Sofie. She takes the cool photos. This is Sofie. I can be myself in front of her, because even though he's like the top star right now, he's still a 23-year-old kid from Buffalo. And he had this image as like Red Def, as like this mercenary type. And I just knew him as Danny with like the cute little gap teeth. And I feel like those photographs didn't exist of him. And I knew that like he was going to have hundreds of photos of him just as that sort of like character. But I just also wanted a photograph that just captured him as like the young man who was living his dream. Because as much as like it's kind of like this is a very star spectacle like industry, you still want to just still capture these larger than life characters as just like regular humans living their dreams. So I wanted to finish off this presentation with this photograph, because I think this photograph wouldn't have been possible. This is, I think, a best example of sort of like the background access and what images you can create and what images you can find when you're sort of like allowed that access and you're sort of like welcomed there. Because I've noticed that in most subcultures that are very protective of it. Most subcultures can be the butt of jokes, especially wrestling. Wrestling has been the butt of jokes for years, and it will continue to be too. It's just a very carny business. But I went into it with a specific intent of just, I find everyone here so fascinating. I find everyone very inspiring, in just in terms of what they have overcome, what they have sacrificed. And I just want to be able, as a photographer or as a documentarian, my purpose and my goal is to just have these photographs. And I'm also like I'm also working in audio and film as well, and kind of just like these cemented moments of a very fleeting lifestyle. Because wrestling comes and goes, wrestlers quit, wrestlers retire, but you're always going to have that very physical and tangible momentums, and that are going to be much more deeper than a standard promo photo or a standard this and that, where they can look back to a specific memory. And so this is one of my favorite photographs, where Cassandra Alexandrico, he's been wrestling since the 80s. And, he had just come out of sort of like a semi-retirement to wrestle in a barn house in Indianapolis. And it was just kind of this very poetic moment. And I just really wanted to, take that time to sort of just celebrate him, but also show him in a light where it just kind of just shows the glamour, the heart, the sacrifice, and all that is so great inside of wrestling. So I really wanted to end this presentation with this photograph. And then that is it. So I don't know if, okay.
Sofie, thank you so much for sharing those photos. I can really see the access and the trust that you built with them that allowed you to spend personal moments with them, not just professional moments. I wanted to ask, it seems like the independent wrestling culture is such a macho world, and maybe I'm mistaken, maybe it's just a stereotype, but what was it like as a young woman going into, traveling around the country and photographing them?
I definitely had, with the wrestlers, I never really felt a problem, because I kind of had adopted this little sister role. Many of them had just kind of looked out for me and just sort of like, you're 21, 20 doing this with us. We're just really want to look out for you. And veterans in the business were just kind of like, oh, what you're doing is pretty cool. We want to protect that. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case in everything. Ironically, it was the other photographers in wrestling who had a problem with me, because wrestling is so old. There is an instance of like older photographers, primarily white males, who just kind of have a very territorial feel with their work, and who are kind of like very outdated in their way, where they thought me photographing them backstage was a disrespect to the business and a disrespect, like, which is insane because even the wrestlers were like, we don't really care. But I think it really just kind of goes down to um, it still is a very machismo place, very masculine in not all aspects, because a lot of the wrestlers that I were working with or friends with, a lot of them were openly queer, non-binary, transgender, black and brown, POC artists who were also navigating the sort of same discriminations and same setbacks as I did. So I was very lucky not to experience it from the wrestlers, but the industry itself, unfortunately, is still very backwards and still is very outdated. So um, that's why I was so more concerned with the wrestlers' stories than as opposed to hearing from a promotion or a promoter. Not all the time, because some promoters are different, but sort of like I wanted their independent struggles also mirrored my own. So that was kind of like one of the struggles I was able to overcome as much, which is unfortunate that it happened, but I think that's kind of unfortunately very common in most entertainment industries or any industry is all. But I was very fortunate to have my friends defend me and have my back.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I see that Yips
Thank
has a
you.
question. And she asks, what styles of art or artists were sources of inspiration for your work?
One artist, actually, so there's a few. The two bodies of work that come to mind are Larry Fink's boxing series. Um, his boxing series, it's always the axis that comes to mind. I just loved his behind the scenes photos, his close-ups. And another one is Lourdes Grobe's Lucha Libre series. I don't know if many people know her. I'm actually going to write her in because I feel like she doesn't get a lot of respect. I consider her, she's one of the first women to document Lucha Libre wrestling in Mexico, but I think she started in 1980 and she just finished the project like in 2018. So she has like a massive archive of wrestling. So I look to Lourdes as an example, especially as a woman doing wrestling, because she did more in Mexico, and that's a little more machismo there. But I just loved her approach and her portraiture. So I always looked to those are two photography works, but also another inspiration of my work was also the Cameron Crowe film Almost Famous, because it was just kind of like I always admired the sort of going on the road and traveling, and the film kind of just reminded me to just keep having fun in a more way. And I see Will wrote, did you go in to cover the events in the ring or strictly the backstage? In the beginning it was a mixture of both, because most promoters wanted you to shoot the ring side, so I did a mixture of both ring and backstage. And then I reached a point where I was like, it's kind of hard to run back and forth. So I was trying to do shows where there was multiple photographers so that the wrestlers still had that documentation, but then I can still do my own portraiture or just kind of candid work. So I took a little break, but I've been kind of going back into it again. And I know that I am trying to find a nice balance of a little bit of ringside work, but also to continue the backstage, because that's really where my heart is devoted to.
Which leads me to another question. Because you do have so much access and you are backstage and you are seeing parts of the events that we aren't privy to. Were there times when you photographed things that they then came to you and said you can't publish that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, a continuation of sort of the kayfabe is that it's kind of looked down upon, where like if you're calling your match, it's understood that that happens, but they don't really want evidence of that happening per
Can you
se.
tell us what that is, calling a match?
The calling match is just so I always say wrestling's never fake, it's fixed or it's scripted, because if you say that it's fake, it implies they don't get hurt. And I know a lot of wrestlers who have torn their ACL, broken limbs. Um, so I am very adamant. Like I never say it's fake, but what they do is because it's storyline, two wrestlers will be like, okay, we'll do this move, I'll do this move, I'll do this and that. Because you go to wrestling school, there's a wrestling school. You have to learn these terminologies, you have to learn these moves, and you have to know what makes sense storyline wise. There's a bad guy and a good guy. So there was an instance where two wrestlers were calling a match, and I really feel like in my defense, you really couldn't see it because it just looks like two people talking. But because they fought later that night, people could maybe piece that together. And a promoter had reached out to me, and he was like, hey, can you please, I posted on Facebook, he's like, hey, can you please bring that down? It kind of ruins the magic for everyone. And I was like, oh, sorry, didn't mean to do that. And I deleted it. And it's like as simple as that. um Unfortunately, this was like a weird promoter, and he was kind of like, hey, next time like your boyfriend lets you in, like he should have let you know. And I was like, I was booked on the show, like I wasn't this like girlfriend coming in, like I was actually like booked on the show. But then wrestlers have also like come to my defense where they're like, they don't care, they're like, wrestling, even though they're like, we like it that you're kind of capturing this. And also there is some things I do photograph with the intent for my own personal archive, but I know that I'm not going to share unless I have like explicit consent from both parties. Like, for example, like masked wrestlers, because that's like a very sacred thing to them. Like they're covering their identity for a reason. And I know some wrestlers who decide to unmask. So that's why I take photos of them backstage. And some could be like, oh, don't photograph me, I don't have my mask on. And if I do, I said, oh, sorry, if you don't want me, you're uncomfortable, sure. And then I tell them, I said, this photograph belongs to me, I'm not going to share it with the intent of like, oh, look at so and so, like Smiley or Edith unmasked, unless maybe a years down the line or eventually there's a show opportunity or both, and I really love this photograph, I can talk with them and be like, hey, are you okay with this, like can we talk about it? Because I think also that communication is very crucial, because if you don't have that communication, it leads to miscommunication. And I think I respect them so much that I try to do my best to sort of make sure that um they know, and we know that I have their best intentions at heart. Like I'm not going into this photographing them to get them at a bad angle or this sort of like gotcha photograph. I just saw the moment as a very interesting, tender, sweet one, whether it's just a wrestler putting their makeup on, putting their mask on. um and I just kind of do it and I keep it. And then when it comes to talks about like, oh, publishing all that, I do intend to like message the wrestlers, because I have that communication wave in that line to be like, hey, I have this photograph, are you comfortable with it, do you like it, let me know. So that's kind of like how I do the balance of it.
Thank you for sharing that. Sofie, I know you're also a documentary filmmaker. Did you, while you were documenting with photography, did you shoot video also or film?
When I was starting the project, I didn't own a video camera, and the camera that I shoot with is a Canon Rebel T6, so the video quality is not so great. But I did have access to a Super 8 camera, and I also had an iPhone 10. So I was just sort of filming the Super 8, like the wrestling on Super 8, and then when I was in car rides and there was just funny moments, I would kind of just whip out my phone and just kind of film like the road trips aspect of it. Um, just kind of because like I wanted that, again, it was like, it was documentation. And also I think also the phone was interesting because it's very incognito. So I have that. And then actually not too long ago, I went back to a wrestling show with the intent just to film. And it was really exciting because I feel like things that I couldn't capture on camera. I'm also like openly like battling burnt out with photography a bit. So I feel like doing the filmmaking was a nice way of like letting my eye train again, letting my eye like see what I saw and capture it in a way where I feel oh, like I'm getting the groove back into it. So with filmmaking, I think what it allows me to do is it gets long, it's kind of like just longer pictures is how I see it. I can photograph, like for example, like the Cassandra photograph
Each one.
is how I photographed that one moment, but the video can also get sort of like his expressions, the pacing around, I think he was praying as well. And, I am like working into filmmaking a bit more. So now I can kind of see how both the photos and the videos can translate to the message that I'm doing.
I know we just have a few last minutes, but I wanted to ask, like, have you exhibited, or like what is your plan to do with the material that you have?
I have not exhibited yet. We're gonna, fingers crossed. My goal and intent with this project is sort of the big three: the exhibition, the photo book, the short film, mainly because this is all my projects are my babies, but this is like my first baby where I really I've put, so I mean, for like just 12 13 months straight, every weekend I wasn't home. Every weekend I was getting film, scanning, buying SD cards, excuse me, because I just didn't have time to format them. And I always did the project with like the intention of it being a book, because that's why, like, in here I did the Polaroids. Like, these are Polaroids right here. This is disposable film. This is black and white film. I was also just trying to explore different mediums as well. And I knew that the photo book is really the main goal for the rest. I do also like want an exhibition as well as any artist would. But I think just because the wrestling is one of the most extensive projects that I've done, and also I have like so many anecdotes from it, I think the book is just really fitting, because I also have been doing research on just other wrestling photographers and other because there's a great community of them. That's another thing. I don't think I really mentioned that. I know I had mentioned earlier, like I had unfortunately stumbled upon some wrestling photographers who were very gatekeeping, but really that's the minority. I've actually have been accepted and have made wonderful friends with other wrestling photographers who bring their own unique perspective and own unique talents, who have been extremely supportive, as well as like mentorship wise. And they do a lot of like zines work and a lot of like posters. I think that's incredible. But also my background was originally as a writer and kind of as a journalist. And with all these anecdotes, I just want to release a book where it's just kind of like, this is a photographer's journey, but also her story as well, the other stories that they had. So I am actively pushing, I am like actively applying to exhibition proposals, grants, publishing things. um it is a massive body of work. There's like over 5,000 images. I think I did 3 days in Indianapolis, and that was about 3,000 images in terms of, because it was just 24 hours for 3 days straight, kind of like. So the body of work is extremely massive. So I've just been working on archiving it and cataloging it so that I can be able to pitch it to these opportunities.
Our time is up, but I want to thank you so much for coming to share your work and to talk about your process. And really, and I think your photography is phenomenal. And I wait for the day when you invite all of us to come to the exhibit and to see the film and to have a chance to own your book.